all the locks so that people can lock themselves in. Those are the first shots.
That's jarring. And to think that.
So do you guys think you are ready for the next civil war, for the U.S. to fall into armed conflict inside itself? Hang on, I have a lot to tell you. I'll be right back.
You heard a while, but that's just what people do. The theory is you always find somebody new. I guess there was a time I believe that was true, but now.
So there's a lot of talk these days about the next civil war, the United States just falling into a left versus right sort of a civil war. And I've done a couple of videos on this so far, talking about some of the things people haven't considered. The fact that it wouldn't be fought in a vacuum, and how things would kind of mill out between the people, how tough it is. But let's actually talk about the stuff you probably haven't thought about. Before we get into that, I want to say this. Yes, I'm telling people how to fight a civil war in the US. No, I'm not declaring war against the US. The conversation we have right now is the epitome of free speech. This was the entire purpose of the First Amendment, so that we could discuss what to do when our representatives get out of control. And this is what we're here to do now. We are to discuss long-term ideas, plans, and thoughts of what to do should we ever fall into armed conflict, so that you and I do not become the victims. So, the next thing I want to mention is this. Everybody calls it the Civil War, and I'm going to call it that just because it is, colloquial. It's what people are calling it. But the next war is not going to be as much a civil war as anything else. Look at it this way. The argument has been made that we'll fall into World War III before we'll fall into the Civil War, as if we get one or the other. I firmly believe that we're going to get both. What we are looking at is the world is going to slowly slip into chaos, and to the point where that chaos creates greater divisions within the US. So we will have already been at war with the rest of the world before we slip into a civil war amongst ourselves, and it'll likely be the fact that we're at war with the rest of the world that brings us into a civil war, because it's going to be the economy and all these things at play that are resulting from the global conflict that create a domestic conflict. So that's another thing to understand. And third and finally, before we get into the soup and nuts here, is we have never had a civil war. The United States has never had a civil war. So calling it the second civil war is really not true. You see, to call what we had in the 1860s a civil war would be to suggest that if Europe or England came over here to the US and declared that we were now again part of their empire and we fought back, that would be a civil war too. It was an invasion of a sovereign nation by the North. Nothing less, nothing more. That's all that it was. We'll have that discussion in another video, and I really do intend on getting into that at some point. But for today, I may call this the Second Civil War, but that's only to suit what we've all been educated to believe, as opposed to the truth behind what's going on. So, having said all that, let's get into the fun stuff. So, if you have built a stockpile of guns and ammo, and you've gone out and you've trained and you've learned all the things you need, then you are probably well suited to defend yourself against some amount of insurrection. But if you're by yourself, you're not going to last long. I mean, going back to the reason the United States became the United States instead of being 13 different states at the time, was because they knew that alone they could not stand. They had to join or die. And that's what we're going to be facing here. If we fall into a civil conflict, you are not going to be able to just stay home and protect yourself beyond the extent that somebody else decides that they, as a group, want whatever it is you have. You cannot, don't delude yourself into believing that you could stand up against an invading army by yourself. You can't. You won't last long. So 99% of the people who think they're ready for the boogaloo are not ready for the boogaloo. It's not going to last. There's a lot more to it. The first thing you're going to have if you're going to get into civil war is organization. And that organization breaks down into a lot of things. So today we're going to focus strictly on the things you need to be thinking about. Now, I'm not going to give you the answers because I can't. We have to organize in order to establish the answers. Unless you want me to be your leader, I can't make those rules for you. So we're going to have to discuss this. But we do need to break down what's going to need to be involved in this kind of organization. Because you can't have a civil war of, let's call it, the United States government against random rednecks everywhere, because without any organization they can easily pick them apart one at a time. There needs to be some unity, there needs to be some rules on both sides. Otherwise, okay, maybe the government won't win. If you look at Afghanistan, there's a certain level of organization. It's actually a lot more impressive than you would think, but there's also a lot of disorganization, and that's why they have not been able to compete against the United States. So they've not been able to win the war. However, because of that disorganization, neither have we. The world coalition, some of the, 25 of the top militaries in the world are over there fighting in a state the size of Texas against farmers and can't win. So yes, there's a certain amount of, draw that can happen. Okay, nobody's going to win. If there's a civil war here and there's no organization on one side of it, there will never be a win. There has to be organization on both sides. The belligerents have to be clearly defined. And part of that is because, if you see random people walking down the street, like in a large group with guns, whose side do you think they're on? How do you know? What do you do? How do you approach them? There's a lot of questions here, because obviously there's going to be, just like in the United States Revolution, when we revolted against England, 70% of the people in the U.S., the now U.S., did not want to revolt. They didn't want anything to do with it. They were like, nope, I'm not fighting them. I'm too comfortable. I'm too happy. I don't want to be involved. So if you think about it from that perspective, you got to figure that, 3 out of 4 of your neighbors are not going to want to get involved. And in fact, probably 1/4 of those neighbors is going to oppose the fact that you've gotten involved. So now you have neighbors who will fight you, or at least turn you in. So you don't know who's on whose side, and that makes it really complicated. So there has to be some sort of organization. So once you've established organization, I don't know how we're going to do it, but we can discuss that. But once you've established that organization, the next thing you have to know is that it doesn't matter how many guns and ammo you have, which we'll get to that, but food. Armies march on their bellies, and food does not last long. I want you to consider this. During the Civil War, the deer population in the eastern U.S. was depleted to the point where some species no longer exist, and they had dropped, by a great percentage. And I don't know actual numbers because it's impossible, but we know that the army camps were killing 100 deer a day per camp just to survive through the winters and through the fighting and to be able to march, to be able to move. 100 deer a day. Can you imagine going into the woods that you're in and killing 100 deer in a day, every day, for 5 years per camp? I mean, you got to think about what it's going to take to feed the numbers of people that you're going to need in order to pull this boogaloo off. So you can't rely on farms. because at that point the farms, the economy, by the time we get to this, the economy is going to be so rotten that the farmers aren't going to be farming. There's not going to be any fuel for them to farm with. There's not going to be any of the supplies they're used to having. Everybody who farms is going to have to go to the old style of farming, and there's just not going to be enough of those out there. Not enough people know how to do it. So you're not going to be able to feed your army. So you've got to find a way, which this goes back to an argument I made in my last video where I talk about, you have to have an external source, an external friend, somebody to bring the stuff in. During the Civil War, there were French and British influences bringing in supplies to help feed these armies and to help keep them supplied. And let's get into supplies. The first problem you have with supplies, which is, the second major factor, is medicine. I mean, what are you going to do about, people like me? I live on medicine. Without my medicine, I won't last long. I have a lot of medical problems, and the medicine that I take is not available in plant form. There are a lot of people. How many diabetics do you know who are getting ready for the boogaloo, right? For the Civil War. How long are they going to last without their insulin? You know what I'm saying? All of the heart pills and all of the different, everything, all these medicines that you need just for daily life are going to go away if we're in a civil war. So, you have to think about that. Plus, combat wounds. How are we going to fix those? Now, a lot of us are trained for trauma and combat trauma, but that's only enough to get somebody from the battlefield to the surgery table. If we are competing against the government, they're going to have the resources to shut down pretty much any kind of medical facility for the most part. We may be able to hide a few of them, but we're not going to have many. So basically you have to expect that, even a small casualty is a death. So you have to get used to that, and that's not easy to get used to. A lot of people are going to get squeamish when they start seeing their friends who they could have saved in any other circumstance die, okay? And I mean from anything from just a simple cut on their hand and infection. So it gets ugly, and people don't like ugly. People have gotten comfortable. So then you got to think about manufacturing. The government pretty much controls manufacturing. They know where it is because everybody had to be licensed to do it, right? So you're not going to get anywhere near the manufacturing on the Patriot side as you would on the military side. So you could not compete with them on manufacturing. That goes back to sneaking stuff in. Of course, we're building a wall across the border so that we won't have a way to sneak things in. Brilliant, good thinking, guys. Anyway, so beyond manufacturing, the next thing that everybody focuses on when you get into a war is transportation. I mean, let's think about it. How many times have trains been hijacked during civil wars or during any kind of insurrection? How many highways have been blown up? How many bridges have been blown up? I mean, how do you starve a population? You cut off transportation, right? That's the easiest thing. You can barricade them in. Fuel is going to be a lot harder to get when the government takes control of it, and they will. Do you have the means to make fuel? Some of you might. I mean, I know how to make fuel out of vegetables, but it's not going to be enough to do anything that we need to do. Frankly, I'd rather turn it into liquor and drink it at that point, because it's just not worth trying to turn it into a usable vehicle. Storage. Where are you going to store enough stuff to do this? I mean, unless you can break states apart and create specific battle lines that are large enough to create manufacturing and storage and all that behind those lines, you're not going to have enough to fight the war. Again, this goes back to finding partners on the outside, but we're still playing just, domestically. So, what do you do? How do you get through the storage problem? If you create storage caches, how long is it going to be before some neighbor or some friend or somebody else who gets tired of the war tells somebody where it is, right? So, ammo, talking about storage, what are you going to do with all your ammo? How much ammo can you carry? Dude, I have a battle vest with about 600 rounds on it, and I could probably run about 2 feet with that on me. Now, granted, I have my problems. In my youth, I could have made it 10 miles with that on me, but that would have been about it, and 600 rounds isn't going to go that far in a real conflict. So what are you going to do? Who's going to carry all this stuff? You don't have the transportation, you don't have storage, you have all this ammo. What are you going to do with it? These are things you need to be thinking about if you really do think that we're going to stand up and fight against an oppressive regime, right? So, how do you resupply that ammo? What do you do? How do you create channels to bring in new ammo and new guns when the guns fail, and new tents and new clothes, boots, hats, the things, the mosquito repellent, things that you're gonna need just to survive, just even if you don't get into conflict. Surviving in this sort of a way is still difficult. I mean, you're not even being shot at, and it's hard to live. Look at World War II. Look at how many people died in World War II because of lack of supplies. I'd argue that a third of the people who died in World War II died because they just weren't getting the things they needed. Not just ammo, but I mean just daily survival, right? So what do you do with that, right? Another question is, what do you do with prisoners? So you find that your neighbor is telling on you. You've got a tattletale, you've got a narc, you've got whatever in your neighborhood, and you find that this person is a problem. What do? Do you kill them? Do you have what it takes to kill your neighbor? That's not easy. You might think you do right now while you're sitting here watching this video because you're comfortable, but in reality, killing another human who is not trying to kill you directly is incredibly difficult. There's a reason that there's always been prisoners of war going back to the beginning of time. Not just because it's hard to kill, but because it kind of behooves you to keep people alive. It helps you win hearts and minds. So what are you going to do for prisoners? Where are you going to keep them? I mean, what are your plans for actually taking in people and processing them and dealing with them and feeding them and keeping them warm in the winter and all that? How are you going to keep your prisoners alive? That's a lot of supplies that you're going to have to dedicate to people who aren't even helping you win. So that's something else you have to think about. Now, the keys to winning this kind of an insurrection is to first set the goals. Determine what it is that you're trying to win. That's one thing the United States military has failed to do since World War II. We have never said the plan is to do this. Once we have done this, we have won. This is what we define as winning. The U.S. is like, well, we will fight against drugs, we will fight against terror. We haven't determined what a win is. We've just determined that we're going to fight against it. If you're going to do that with limited supplies and limited transportation, then you're not going to last very long. You need to decide what it means to win and then dedicate all of your resources to doing that as quickly as possible. I'm sorry about the buzz in the background. I have a refrigerator here. It's getting pretty loud. So, and once you've established that, then you need to establish places of safety. Home, how do you live? Where are you going to live? Where are other people going to live? If you're going to win hearts and minds, you're going to have to protect the people who aren't necessarily interested in what you're doing. Because if you make their life miserable, you become their enemy. And that's not a good idea. And you know as well as I do that the government in this kind of a situation is going to spend their time campaigning to make you look like the bad guy. So you have to go way above and beyond to be the good guy. How hard is it going to be with limited supplies and limited transportation to fight against this big government machine of showing your neighbors that it's your fault that they're hungry and that they don't have fuel, and that how do you think that's going to turn out? So you have to find a way to win the hearts and minds. That's crucial, and you can't do that without communications. So now you got to enter in communications. How do you communicate with this vast organization, this countrywide organization of fighters who are working with you? How do you work with them? How do you decide who's on your side, and how do you talk to them, and how do you tell them what you're going to do and what they're going to do? How do you know, again, when someone's walking down the street, if they're on your side or the other side? What communication have you got set up? Probably very little. I'm assuming that you may have radios. We all have the radios, but what good are those radios going to be if we have no system of identification and no coding, no way to say, well, I know the government's listening right now, so how do I get around them? What can I say that they won't be able to interpret? None of that's set up. You're not ready for this, guys. You're not. So, you get into that. That goes back to getting help. Always getting help. Everything means we're going to have to find somebody somewhere else. So how do we do that? How do we reach out to a freedom-loving society that has the means to help us? How do we reach out to them, and how do we communicate with them? How do we go around the U.S. government's lockdown on who we can and cannot talk to, and actually have these conversations with other people and say, look, our freedom is being taken away. We need to fight. We need your help. Will you help us? And what are we willing to exchange? The United States, sorry about that, I hit the microphone. The United States has a history of getting in bed with ugly people to facilitate their needs. And it's not just the United States, everybody in combat has to get in bed with somebody they don't like to facilitate their needs. Be it mafia, be it the Mexican cartels. I mean, that, look, say what you want, but they'd probably be a great source to help us if we ever came to the point where we had to fight against our government, because they've been fighting against our government for decades. But that goes, into what I'm saying is that, you look at what we did to Russia in the late 70s and early 80s with Operation Cyclone. We went over there and we got in bed with the Mujahideen, with guys like Osama bin Laden, and we trained them and we armed them and we got them to help us fight the war. That's what we're going to have to do, You look at what's going on today. We've been in bed with ISIS. We've been in bed with, the people at Benghazi. Not our side, but the other side of Benghazi. It's why we were there. You must know that, right? You can't be that dumb. We've been in bed with the Ukraine. We've been in bed with Russia. We are in bed with Russia. So, we get in bed with whoever facilitates our needs. And as a belligerent against the U.S. government, if we get to that point, you're going to need to get in bed with some people that you're not going to like, right? So then you start running into spies. You're going to need intel. You are going to need to create a spy network that can keep track of what the other side is up to. And they're going to do it too. So how do you know? How do you establish who in your organization what stranger just walked up and joined your little militia and is not helping you? They may become your best friend because that's what spies do, and they may be funneling information over to the other side so that when the time comes, they can collapse on you and they can destroy you just like that. How do you set that up? What is your system for vetting people? In a limited society like that where you're the enemy of the government, how do you vet people? It's not so easy, guys. You need to be thinking all this through. Look, this is getting kind of long, and I think you get the point. When you say that you're armed to the teeth and you're ready for the boogaloo, then that means you are 1% of the way there. We have to get 99% of the way there before anything like this could ever happen. And I'm not saying I want it to happen. I am just pushing a little bit of reality in your face. You're focused on tactics when you should be focused on logistics, right? The tactics are simple. You have farmers in Afghanistan teaching you the tactics. That's the easy part. It's logistics. Armies run on logistics. Why do you think the United States Army has such a huge support MOS group? I mean, what is it? A third or 2/3 of the Army is support MOS? You think you can go to war with your guns and ammo. You won't last long. Listen, guys, I appreciate you coming here. I'm going to get into some more details of what I think would unfold in a coming video. I haven't really laid it all out. I've got maps that I've laid out, and I've kind of been drawing things up, and I've still got a little ways to go. So it's going to be a little while, but you are going to get another chapter of this series. Just be patient, because I've also got a lot of things going on this month. So listen, guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming to my channel. We will go back over to the other fun stuff as soon as possible. Thank you so much. I love you.
You heard a while, but that's just what people do. The theory